of all, we started this process. We looked at every city site in Newton. Every 145 city-owned parcels. And here's the spreadsheet. I didn't print out one for everybody because I like trees. But it's here. People are more than welcome to take a look, and it will be posted online tomorrow, so folks can take a look. When we looked at the 145 sites, we did something pretty quickly, and that is we know that our program is going to take approximately 2.5 acres, which means that right out of the gate, about 2/3 of those sites were too small. So those got knocked off the list. Of the remaining sites, we identified anything that is dense woods or conservation area and doesn't have any open space. Those went off the list because we're not going to clear cut a forest, and we're not looking to go after conservation restrictions at the federal or state level. We also took anything off the list that has an existing unmovable asset. A good example of something like that would be Fire Station 3 headquarters in Newton Center. We're not going to suddenly move that building and try to put this facility there. So what that left us with was kind of what I consider 3 categories. The 24 sites that you see are the sites that can physically fit our program. Some of them are going to be great sites, others are going to be not so great sites. Some may be possible, some may be completely impossible. Some may just be impractical. Then the middle bucket, if you will, is filled with sites that are possible but would require compromises to our program. So, for example, it may not be 2.5 acres, maybe it's 2 acres, maybe it's 1.75 acres. There could be some sites in that middle ground that we'll revisit to take a look at to see if they could meet our program. And then there are the sites that really, there's no chance. I'll give you an example of Honeywell Park. It's just based on where it's at, the access to it, the shape of the park, it just does not work. So that's kind of where we went. About a month ago, I presented those 24 possible sites to the City Council. They are organized left to right based on, we just happened to filter geographical center of the city as defined as the intersection of Beacon and Center Street. Or Beacon and Walnut Street, thank you, Alex. So it's not, that's the only reason. They're not in order of priority, they're not in the order of ranking, they are simply based on a single point in the city. That does not mean that that is our driving factor. It does not mean that we are looking for a site that is the closest to the center of the city. As you'll see in the handouts, we have a lot of criteria that we're trying to manage here. So we will be evaluating all of these sites and possibly more based on all of those criteria. Some will rise to the top, others will sink to the bottom. Nothing ever comes off the list. And I want to explain what that means. There are lots of sites that we will say cannot work, but it never comes off the list, because what we don't want to do is get to the end of the project, recommend a site, and then have somebody go, well, how come you didn't look at this? We want that to be on the list, probably shaded out, and notes that identify why it didn't work. I would encourage anybody that is interested. We did that process for our school projects and our fire stations. Believe it or not, Cold Springs Park was on both the Ainger and Zervis site selection matrix. We evaluated it back then, and it didn't get removed from the list, but it became quite obvious that it wasn't going to work, and there were better sites, i.e. the sites where the schools are. Kind of made sense. We recognize how important parks are. We really do. We are not suggesting a hostile takeover of anybody's park space. Couple priorities that we're looking at right out of the gate. Wherever we do put this, if it is indeed a park, we need a couple things. Well, we need a lot of things, but we need community support. We need the Parks and Rec Commission support. We need the City Council support. And we need a number of departments to support that. We recognize in order to achieve those things, if we are looking at a park site, we need to make sure that it is as beneficial to the project or to the community as it is to the project. So, a couple things within that. If we do go to park space, one of our priorities, as you'll see in the list, is we have placed a high value on trees. We are not trying to clear cut trees in a park. Another thing that we have identified, I don't believe it's necessarily on the list specifically, but it is carried within one of those elements, is that we don't want any loss of active field space. It's not to say that passive field space is any less important, but we're not looking to eliminate active field space. What that means is that if we did have to do something that eliminated an active field, we would replicate that field at that location. If we can't do that, then that site gets grayed out. That's just how we're approaching it. For passive area, what we're looking at is, are there ways to master plan a park to maximize the amount of park and open space and active space that by doing so, creates enough space for us to carve out a location to put this facility. We are also very sensitive to parking. One of the things that we're looking at is we are looking at it as we look at all of our sites, and this isn't just parks, but even more so important with parks. We are evaluating each site to see if there's complementary adjacent parking. We don't want to pave paradise. That's not what we embarked on, and it's not what we're about doing. We are looking at sites that have complementary existing hardscapes so that we don't have to create more hardscape on our site. At the same time, we recognize that our primary user group here are the seniors in Newton. So complementary parking needs to be relatively close. We can't say that it's complementary and it's 3/4 of a mile away. Other projects that we do, complementary parking can be a bit of a walk, that's fine. And it's not to say that some of our complementary parking can't be a ways away, because seniors in Newton is a very long range, 60+ years. Some are very active, and it doesn't necessarily matter if it's somebody that's in their 90s or in their 50s. The person in their 90s may be very active, the person in their 50s may have a hip problem and may not be able to. So just wanted to point that out. The other thing is we've had the Parks and Rec Commission, the Parks and Rec Department, city councilors, the Council on Aging. We've been working on this project for about a year now. We've had them involved. We specifically brought the Parks and Rec Commission and the Parks Department in early and often, so that we're making sure that we are, so that the parks have a voice here. Our ultimate goal is to reduce the number of sites by the 24 down to, ideally, I'd love to see it below 6, so that we can then start to really evaluate each one. Because in all fairness to wherever this project ends up, I think that community and the supporters of that site are going to need to see what the vision is, what could it be. They may hate it still, quite frankly, but in fairness, in order to give each one of these sites a fair shot, we need to show what it could do for the community, what it could do for seniors, and what it won't do, most importantly, to that site or to that park. We may end up with none of these sites working. We know that going in. None of these may work. And if that happens, we just keep going down the list. We will find a way to get it done. It's a very, very important project. As Jane Colino can attest, and others in the room from the Council on Aging, the number of seniors in Newton is growing rapidly. It's going to continue to grow. So we certainly have to make sure that we're providing a wonderful facility for them. But this is going to take time. I said at the very start of this project that the site selection process was going to be the longest. We haven't done a major civic building in Newton in many, many decades. It's just a very different animal. The other thing that's interesting about it is that unlike a school which has a district, or a fire station which has a response zone, this can go anywhere. You know, there are certainly priorities. There's areas that we'd like to see it more than others, but realistically, it could be almost anywhere in the city, which is great in the flexibility, certainly challenging when it comes to finding the appropriate site to put it in.
As usual, Josh has touched on most things. Very thorough. So, but I did want to just chime in, as the Parks and Recreation Commissioner, along with Nancy Scammon, who works in our department, who's been part of this committee since day one, along with Jack Neville, who is one of our commission members, has been on this committee since day one. And I think our meaning to be here is twofold. First of all, recreation is going to have a presence in this building, most definitely. I mean, there's some talk about a 10,000 square foot size gymnasium, which is just fantastic, because we don't have enough gym space in this city. And certainly we'll have presence in the classrooms and other places as well. So again, it's twofold, but more importantly, not only for the building, I think another reason why I'm here as part of this committee from day one is because in my role as the Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, one of my biggest duties in my mind, not only is it written down, but it's in my mind as well, is that I'm the steward of open space. So I can tell you, I take that very seriously. So when it came time and we started looking at all these sites, and we knew that these sites were all gonna be, as Josh said earlier, you need a site that needs to be 2.5 to 3 acres in size. Well, I think if you look at that map that Josh just showed you of the city of Newton, when you do that, you're gonna find that the sites that are 2.5 to 3 acres are mostly Parks and Recreation sites. So that being said, Josh approached me at one point early in the process and he said, does anything jump out at you? And my comment back was, every site is gonna have its issues. And it will have its issues. One of the misnomers I wanna clear up, and Josh has already spoken to it, Cold Spring Park is not number one because it was number one on that board of councilors list. It just happened to be there because Josh said it was geographically in the center. I am well aware of what has gone on at New Cold Springs and Old Cold Springs. We have people here tonight who were here for part of the dog park process, part of the off-leash site process, which I was very heavily involved in, which was a long battle. Not a battle that I really want to undo at this time. So, again, looking at the process, when Josh talks about Old Cold Spring, what's the first thing that comes to my mind? I say to Josh, it's an off-leash site. It's the anchor off-leash site in the city. So to take that away would be problematic. One of the other things that's come out, I've heard people say over the last couple of days is, why didn't you vet these out early and take some of them completely off the table before you went through the process that Josh is going to talk about tonight? I don't feel that would be fair. This group has worked hard on a process, they've come up with a very nice process, so I think we need to go through the process. So in my mind, you're hearing about it tonight, because tonight, other than being with the board, the council, this is the first time that the public is seeing this. It's the first time they're seeing the process. So I think you have to allow the process to go through. Give it a shot, give it an opportunity, you'll see. There's a lot of people with a lot of good thoughts on this committee that understand all these things, as I do as well. And believe me, I can tell you here tonight that I'm gonna be here fighting for open space. I can't just say, take it off there because it just shouldn't be on the list. It needs to be there, it needs to go through the process. Even with that said, once it goes through the process, it still has to go to the Parks and Recreation Commission for a 2-meeting process, and it has to go in front of the council. So there are a lot of different checkpoints throughout this process where people are gonna have an opportunity to speak publicly to it, and where I'm gonna have an opportunity to speak publicly to it, and I think we'll vet it out properly. So I understand, when it came out these last couple of days, there was a real concern because people thought fait accompli, it's going to Cold Springs. That's not the case. There's no number 1, there's no number 14, there's no number 25. Again, it's obvious that these sites are recreation sites. I think we have to give the opportunity to look at them. And again, I'll finish with reiterating one more time. I am on your side. I am gonna, obviously as the Parks and Rec Commissioner, really vet each one of the sites out and not make Josh's job so easy. So he's gonna have the battle beat. So I'll let you guys begin. Thank you.
2 other just quick things. So folks have this handout, but I know you can't read this, but I just wanted to point out line 5. So there are, on the left-hand side, second column in, there are a bunch of weighting factors. On line 5, geographic site facts, it says maximizes parks and recreation support. This whole section, section A, doesn't have weighting factors. The reason for that, the first 3 are just data points. Number 4 and number 5. Number 4 is avoids legal restrictions in city-owned land. Number 5 is maximizes recreation support. These don't have weighting factors because if we don't have parks and recreation support, that site's not gonna happen. Can't say that more clearly. If we don't have the Parks and Rec Commission support, that site will not happen. So we cannot just pick a site and go to town. We need support. And in order to get Parks and Recreation Commission support, we need community support. So, the other thing I'd point out is, I know that the list that we put out, the 24, it was filtered. I explained how that happened and how Cold Springs became number 1. This is the very first list. I made it myself 4 or 5 months ago. Again, people are happy to look at it. You know what the number 1 is on this list? City Hall. Yeah, so I wasn't implying that that's our number one site, but I just want to let you know that there are so many different cells, depending on how you filter it, any one of these sites could end up looking like the number one site. So the rest of the night, we have our architect, as folks may remember, we had SBA Architects. They filed for bankruptcy a couple months ago. EH+A is on board. They've done a lot of community and senior centers. We're very excited. They are here tonight. We were going to do an introduction, allow them to explain, their expertise, their experience, and what this. It is hot. Yeah. Knock it down.
No, I could get down some more, but the dancing is all the way up.
Keep playing with that. All right, I'll just cut to the chase. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open it up for questions specific about what we just talked about before we go into the rest of our presentation, so that I'm not keeping everybody here all night long. You're more than welcome to stay all night long, but that's it. Yes?
Just a quick question. Your 2.5 acres, am I correct, that includes no parking space?
So, nope, great question. So 2.5 acres, and this is part of the reason why there are other sites beyond the 24 that we could go reevaluate. 2.5 acres includes the parking. So if we don't need that parking, that can come down. So what we're currently carrying as a target is 75 parking spaces. They don't necessarily all need to be on site. If they are, we're on the north end of that 2.5 acres. If they're not, we're probably at the 2 acre or less mark.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
I just had two questions. One, is a dog park considered active or passive use? Because it seems rather active in the case of the use of course. That would be deemed an active use?
It's active.
And the other question is how long have they known about it? Because I know that the parking lot in Newtonville was a parking lot sold off by the city for dense development, and that would have been a perfect spot right next to the existing stuff. So I want to kind of know how long they've known that they were going to be building a NewCAL.
So this was an initiative started by Mayor Fuller about 18 months ago.
Way after that decision.
Okay, so
Yes.
I'm a member of the board of the Friends of Cold Spring Park. But what I want to say, just briefly, as a question, is that I think I'm for all the parks. I don't think it's my park versus the Friends of Kennard Park or Stearns Playground. I think green spaces ought to be protected. And I'm curious, I understand it must be a financial thing. Why listing only city-owned properties? There are abandoned factories, parking lots, and other stuff, and it'll cost money, I understand that. But to me, it would be better to bond that and spend some money on those kinds of sites that are already paved than to look for city-owned properties, which are largely parks. And that's a problem for a lot of us here, I think.
Yep. So to answer that question, we have looked at a handful of privately owned sites. The New England Mobile Book Fair we looked at as it was going out. Problem was it's acreage-wise it's not bad, but it's a very narrow lot, so it was very difficult to build. Very south side too, which those aren't game changers, but those are factors. We have on our list Northland and Riverside. Those have been brought up. We're going to continue to evaluate those as potential options. And then in that maybe category, and again, this will be posted tomorrow, you'll see a whole bunch of sites after the 24 that are in the maybe category that are on the shorter end, which, to your point, if we have adjacent parking, we don't need as much parking. We can lower that upper threshold of the acreage that we need, and it may make some other sites that are or are not parks available to evaluate. But I do recognize how important all the parks are. Yes?
Judy Burton, I live right near Cold Spring Park, but and I agree 100%, the high school didn't get built there, other things haven't been built there because of the aquifers, and a lot of other things. However, this past Tuesday night, I was sitting in the Planning Commission meeting. It's not the first time I've been to several, both on the Riverside project and this was on the Northland. Both of those developers are asking for huge numbers of concessions and special whatever. And my feeling is both of those sites have space. The Northland project, they're talking about a piece of what they own. They're not even talking about the second piece over by Tower Road. So I think before any special permitting is granted to either of those developments, that this project focuses more on that, because everywhere in the world, Boston, New York, concessions are given, and if you want development, and the developers aren't adhering to what our standards are, we have a need that's 2.5 acres, they've got more in both of those spaces. So I think it really behooves you guys and everybody here to start to go to those meetings and start to bother them about the changes they're making to consider a senior center. On Tuesday, they were talking about a community building. So they've already been thinking about some of this stuff.
Yep.
And I don't know if anybody else has been going to those meetings. If you're not, you should be.
I have.
Okay, you know.
I know, yeah.
And
That's why they're on the list.
yeah, I mean, they would be far better because they want something. They're also going to have buildings that are going to appeal to a senior community that doesn't want to be in their homes anymore. And they even admitted that the other day. So I'd like to be involved in this whole process because I'm very concerned about it. So invite me to your committee, please.
Certainly, please, and actually, it sounds like a cheap plug because it is. Sign up on your way out if you didn't on your way in, so that we can get you on the listserv so that you're aware of everything that's going on. Thank you. Yes?
Josh, does the 2.5 acre site assume a 1-story building or a 2-story building?
Great question. So,
In here?
does the 2.5 acres assume a 1-story or a 2-story building, or a 3 or 4-story? Right now, we're assuming that our footprint is approximately 20,000 square feet. Our total gross square footage for the project is 38,000 square feet. So we're thinking 2 stories. Could it be 3? Yes, but there's diminishing returns as far as the amount of square footage it actually peels off. You know, roughly 45,000 square feet in an acre. If we save a few thousand square feet by going to a 3-story versus a 2, it doesn't have a major impact on the site, but it's certainly an option. We don't typically look at single-story buildings. This is urban design. And unless somebody knows of a large flat area that nobody wants in a really great location, we're probably going to be sticking to at least a 2-story. Yes?
So, I have a question about, I don't know if this is getting too specific, but I think it's really important that we look at what else that site has to offer seniors. And the thing that I like about Albemarle Park is the outdoor swimming pool that's right there, which would be very nice for seniors to be able to walk over to a really nice outdoor swimming pool in the summer. But I don't know if the 16.9 acres that you have listed here includes the pool and all the other buildings. And so if you take that off, do you have any idea about how many acres are left?
I don't, I'm not sure, Susan, but I think that's a great point. Let me just touch base on that a bit. Because we talked about sites, we talked about green space, we talked about open space. Some of these sites that we're looking at, Albemarle being a great example of that, has hard surfaces too, has current buildings that currently exist. There is a pool there, there's a field house there are tennis courts behind it, there's a basketball court there. So there's some hardscapes that we're looking at as well that wouldn't necessarily interfere with the current open space that's on the site. And that's another thing that we're talking about with potential. So there's some places that have that. So again, that's why I said earlier, you have to let the process play itself out because those are all pluses and minuses that we have to look at. Obviously, if we're gonna put something on top of an existing hard space and take, as Susan just said, take that pool away, take the field house away, and the building goes there with the pool next to it right there, I haven't taken any field space at all. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. Yes?
Hi, I'm Lee McIntyre. I'm one of the original dog park people.
You are the original.
So, there are 4 sites here. But depending on how you count, maybe 5 depending on how you count, but there are 4 sites here that are on dog parks. And I want to nail it down. Is dog walking active or passive? Because I remember
We talked about
7, 8, 9 years ago, whether it was active or passive, and I remember
Talking
this.
about being passive.
Yeah, and so if you're now saying it's active.
Well, I call it an active activity, and maybe passive, maybe considered passive recreation. I agree with you, Lee, it's semantics.
Well,
But
yeah,
even with
this
that,
is gonna matter.
even with that, it's a dog park.
Yeah.
So that's what's gonna come up, that's what we're gonna talk about. There's an element there that's already transpiring, it
We are
is an
gonna
off
talk
leash
about
site.
that.
Yeah, it's a working dog park, so
That's right.
that's Well, it doesn't matter whether it's passive or active, it is an off-leash site, so that has to be taken into play.
Do you want me to go on the record on this one? I'm happy.
Or
So-
Josh, he's a logician, so be careful.
Okay, that's fine, and I know I'm being recorded. So I can tell you that active and passive matters for the purposes of master planning a park, but I consider a dog park an asset to the community. If there's an existing dog park on any of these sites, then and we need to impact it, then we need to recreate it on that site, not somewhere else, but on that site. So, and that may be in the form of, let's say you got a 1 acre, use Cabot, for example, Cabot Field. I'm not suggesting that we're going there, please. That's not what I'm suggesting. But, you know, let's say we were gonna put NewCAL down that end and we needed to clip a corner of that. In my mind, then we need to recreate that corner. It's it's an element, it's a real thing, it's a benefit to the community, it's something that we are providing, it's one of the reasons, many reasons that people live in Newton. So, again, that goes back to, we are here to respect these sites. And if we don't come out and come up with a project that the community is supportive of, we're not going to get anywhere on this project. So, I'm on the record, Julie is recording, yes. Oh, did you have more questions, right?
Not right now.
Oh, okay, all right.
Somehow, I feel that if you put a dog park in the same area as a senior center, there's gonna be a lot of complaining.
Nobody in Newton complains.
No. Only on special occasions.
Yeah. Yes.
How are you assessing the traffic patterns for all this?
So we have, through our architectural contract, we bring in consultants for a variety of different things, whether it be environmental, geotechnical. Traffic is a major element that we evaluate on every single project. So we'll do a full-blown traffic analysis. We don't do it, certainly, because you guys are all taxpayers here, we certainly don't do it for 24 sites. We narrow that down to a smaller list, and quite frankly, we typically don't do a full-blown traffic analysis until we get down to the site. If we get down to a couple and we're really, kind of on the bubble, we might consider doing some simple counts and a feasibility level analysis before we make a final selection, but traffic is something that we will certainly be evaluating. Yes?
This is a question or a comment about philosophy. My name's Robert Greenstein. I lived at the intersection of Beverly and the access to Cold Spring Park for about 10 years.
Yeah.
So I know that place very well. And it's really a jewel in the city. It's wild space, it's trails, it's some open fields. I don't think you could reproduce that anywhere. And in an era when Newton's getting denser and denser, and everywhere you look, there's more people, more traffic. I don't understand how you can begin to consider green open space as something that can be replaced by what's essentially an urban development that is senior center. It's a bad trade-off. And take this 20, 30 years out, we're gonna be paved over like Forest Hills in New York or some other semi-urban communities. And I think we have to be very careful about that. And it's much better to look at abandoned space, like a gentleman over here had mentioned, old factory, something coming down. Why not put it on something that's already hard?
Yep.
Why take away greenery?
So, again, we are not trying to take away green space. One of our priorities is to protect and preserve green space. We may, through this process, find ways to expand green space and compensation for the green space that's lost. Just one scenario. Why would we do it? Why? It wasn't that we woke up one day and went, you know what, we really want to take over a park. That would be a great thing to do. No, really what it is one of our priorities. This is going to attract one of the largest demographic sectors in Newton. So it is a large chunk of Newton residents that are going to benefit from this facility. And parks are meant to be enjoyed. It's something that can anchor a park. It can bring people in so that they benefit from that park. They can use that park. But again, I will restate, it can only work if we find a way to strike that balance where everybody feels that their needs are being met and that we're not just paving paradise or putting up a hardscape. I'll give you an example. Let's say we have a park that has a series of basketball courts. It's hardscape now, it's outdoor. Outdoor basketball courts are great. Would we consider, if we were to replicate that with a large indoor series of courts, that, I don't know. It's a question for the community. We're gonna evaluate each one. Some sites are gonna be different than others. You know, you'll notice on the list here, Forte Park, for example. It is completely programmed out. Almost every square inch of that space has fields, active fields. So yes, we could look at a space like that and try to replicate those elements. The problem is now you have to replicate the entire site. That's cost prohibitive. We're creating one, we're solving one problem by creating another. So that's my answer. Yes, Julie.
You kind of went halfway to answer my question. Can you commit that if you took away passive space, that you would recreate that passive space somewhere else in the city?
It's a very good question.
Something that's, you know, paved now or building now, restore it to green space.
So, how best do I answer that? I don't want to commit to that now, not because I don't feel that we'll do it, but because I think each site needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And the reason I say that is that there are certain sites in the city, and I'm not even sure they're actually necessarily on this list, but you have certain parks. Let me give you an example, and I am not suggesting this is where we put it. Be very clear about this, but the portion of Cabot of Albemarle Park that's all the way down at the Horace Mann end is a pit. It has an orange cone that sits in the middle of it. I don't know why, but it's a pond. There is not a blade of grass. I'm not suggesting it's not big enough, first of all. I'm not suggesting we would put NewCAL there, but it is not a terribly attractive space. And there are parts of parks out there that have those kinds of areas that are just kind of an eyesore. That would be a community decision. It's not something that I can decide. It's not, quite frankly, something that Bob could decide. The community would have to get involved in that. Would we want to replicate that? Yes. There's always a cost to doing something like that, and the community may decide, you know what, I would love to replicate everything, but I'm willing to sacrifice this little piece, and I don't feel I necessarily need to replicate that piece. Maybe we need to replicate half. I don't know. It's a negotiation, essentially. It's a balance here. Yes?
Lions Little League field, is that permanently moved out of there? They haven't been playing Little League.
No, it is not, it's still there. There has been an issue over the last couple of years. That field has always been somewhat wet in deep right field and behind the right field
I
fence.
understand that.
Over the last couple of years, it's become a little more exacerbated than that. It's coming onto the field a little more, it's lasting a little longer. So we're in the process right now of trying to find out exactly what's going on with that, the Charles River, the height of the river. So that we've had a number of engineers look at it already. So Lions Field is still there. We're trying to rectify the problem so they can start their Little League season in May when they should be, not at the end of June like they're looking at right now.
Good to hear.
Yes, sir.
Two things. First of all, thanks for fixing the AC.
You have to turn it on.
And two, if you find a location up there of the 24, what's going to happen with the existing senior center? Will that be a park, more green space for Newton, or is that going to be insert?
All right, so great question. We've been asked a lot as we've been doing all our community meetings over the last year. Right now, that building is going to stay a city asset. I can tell you that much. I don't believe that it's going to get torn down. I think it would be extremely difficult. It's on the National Registry of Historic Places. Robert Frost was there when they cut the ribbon.
Oh my gosh.
There's a host of, I could go on, but I don't think it's going anywhere. There's been a number of just random thoughts thrown out there about possible uses. I know it's going to get used. That's the thing. It's a great location. It's just a very small site. I would love to leave the facility there, but we'd have. First of all, I really feel we'd have to tear it down, and second of all, even tearing it down, we'd have to expand that site substantially to make it happen. So it's not going anywhere. Yes, sir.
I have a couple questions. Your building is going to be 38,000 square feet?
Yes.
And is there a particular reason that you couldn't, since we're land poor, so to speak, that you can't break it into blocks and put it in different sections of the city? I know you've got a gym, you could put the gym, you don't have to have it all on one site. You need to have it all on 100,000 square feet Or could you break it down and put it on three 25,000 square foot lots? And then my other point is Craft Street, McGuire Court on your list that you made.
Not on this list.
Okay, well, I would suggest you look at it. I know that the city workforce, at least it's my understanding, has been reduced since we acquired those properties. And there may be some efficiencies that would allow the use of some of the land either at Craft Street or Elliott Street, depending on how you want to structure your vehicles and things. But McGuire Court also has some land that was proposed for development, and now that the proposal is down, is off the table. And it may be that the people that own that land might be interested in selling it. And there's plenty of land down there. As the gentleman pointed out, that would be a place to look for the fund development project.
Thank you very much. I wrote that down. We will take a look. To answer your first question, decentralized model is what we call that. We have been evaluating that over the past year as far as breaking this chunk up, if you will, into little chunks around the city. The reality is we are already operating in a decentralized model. We have senior programming throughout the city at a number of different facilities in many different villages. There are challenges certainly when it comes to taking this facility and then decentralizing it again. First of which is just staff. Trying to staff and manage all of those programs all around the city becomes more challenging and quite frankly costly. It also, I think a lot of people, when they think of the senior center, think of programs. There's a services element that's extremely important. And it's very difficult to offer those services in a decentralized model. And by services, it could be social services, health and wellness services. So, clearly something like yoga and Pilates, you could do in a decentralized model, and it's already happening that way. There are benefits to having it in a centralized model, but the services is really the piece that makes it difficult. But we have evaluated that. I know it's a conversation we've had with the Council on Aging and Jane Colino, the Director of Senior Services as well. Yes, I'm sorry, I keep going to the right. Yes?
One question, just an example. I wonder, the Aquinas Junior College site, how come that is eliminated?
It's not. Yep.
It's not on the list.
It's not on the short list. It's not eliminated. It's on my long list. It's in the maybe category. And quite frankly, the reason it's in the maybe category is we've got another project going there.
I know, but it's 6.5 acres.
It is in fact 6.2. But who's counting?
Seniors are pretty smart.
So we have looked at it. It is an option. I'll just lay it all on the table. One of the things that we're trying to balance over there is that you have the Jackson School with 204 students. You have the Montessori School with almost exactly 300 students. You have 500 staff between those two schools. You have, 500 staff between those schools and Lincoln Elliott, which will be moving to 150 Jackson. You have the old Lincoln Elliott, which will be a swing school. All in all, what we're looking at is well over 1,000 students coming and going in that neighborhood in morning and the afternoon. So it's not to say that it's not possible, because it is very possible, but it's not a perfect solution. So we will evaluate these. If these, for whatever reason, don't work, if we don't find what we're looking for, if we get blown up and it doesn't, we can't do any of these, then we go back into that second tier of maybes, and that's one of them. Now, the other challenge with that, with the 150 Jackson Road site, is that one of our priorities is to have it close to amenities that benefit the senior population. Some of it depends on your definition of close, I suppose, but it is a little removed from some of the village centers. Again, not saying it's a bad site. It's got a lot going for it. It is a big land area, beautiful grounds. So that's it. It's on the list, just not on the short list yet. Yes?
I just want to emphasize, I think we've talked about it, but as someone who just is recovering from foot surgery, who was perfectly fine 2 years ago, but I'm really very aware now of transportation, and I'm a senior, and I feel like the number one first thing that has to be not only centrally located, but ease, and I like the idea of being near services too. that you just mentioned, but
Yep.
accessibility for seniors, and, you know, it sounds like you need to do a poll or really analyze what the senior community needs in terms of getting places, you know, in other words, how many drive, how many are gonna need to walk, how many are gonna take I have never taken the bus around, I don't even know how to get them, and where do they, you know, and to me, the team maybe, but that's I think that should be almost one of the top priorities in locating something like that.
So just to be clear, the one that we have provides ease of access to the site, that is the category. There's a lot of things that we roll into these categories, because otherwise it'd be like 4,000 different criteria. But the reason that this is here, and the reason that it's weighted at a 10, is because of that very fact. If we could build the best facility there is, but if nobody can get there, what are we doing? So,
What's the ease of access?
Ease of access, yes.
And what is it?
What is it? It's a combination of things. It is the ability to get from your house to that facility. So that could be, exactly, it is by varied means of transportation. It could be foot, bicycle, the T, your car, pneumo, you name it. The other part of that, and the reason this is why I'm saying that some of these things get consolidated, is that we need to look at individual sites that could offer significant challenges. I'll give you an example. The Andover Newton Theological Center site. I'm not suggesting this again, but there's big plans for it. I get that, but it's a belly. Like, there's hills. It's a challenge. Could we make it accessible? Yes. Could we make it barrier-free? No. So in order to make it accessible, you have 1 million switchback ramps up and down and all over the place. That's great, but this is New England. So you have winter. That would not be fun, especially for anybody with mobility challenges. So there's a lot of things in each one of these that we're looking at, but the ability to get there and get there safely without barriers is extremely important to us.
There's a high percentage of seniors that don't walk and don't bicycle.
I agree. Yes, sir.
Is there any scenario you can think of under which the golf courses would be part of the solution?
Can we put it on a golf course? I'm paraphrasing, but is there any scenario in which we would consider golf courses? So golf courses are sites that we do look at on any site selection matrix. They are not easy. Yes, so, but they're obviously very large land areas. We can certainly look at those. Just like we had a question a while back to take a look at the institutions, educational institutions, to see if there's any land available there. We put those feelers out. I'd be happy to reach out again to the golf courses to see if they've got an 18th green that they're willing to give to us or something. But I know what you're saying. It's not just asking them. I can work with our law department to see what our options are on that front.
I'm just thinking, if they had areas that were not of terrible use to them, but were sort of working on something else that, I don't know whether any of that exists, they might be amenable to long-term lease. It's probably one chance for college.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I realize it's not a central location, it's kind of on the south side, but since the college was taken over by UMass Amherst, Mount Ida College, they got a lot of, probably have a deal with the state where the city wouldn't even have to pay for it.
So I went down that road very quickly, early on, because believe it or not, I envisioned that I'd be standing in front of a group just like you at some point, and I'll probably have many more before this is done. They are very interested in utilizing all of their land. We will continue to keep that dialogue open, and plans change, so there might be opportunities. We will continue to have that conversation with them on this project, and quite frankly, others. There's a lot going on in there.
So they were reluctant, they don't want any part of it.
They are, at this point, they are not clear on what their long-term plans are. So with that, they're not in a position to be able to give up resources they currently have control.
Because since they're political, maybe a little political, Newton and,
I hear you. If the door's open, we'll continue to look. Yes, Julie?
I'm curious how you arrived at 75 parking spaces as sufficient, because, having watched you proceeding to try to take down the trees at the library parking lot because you need more space at the library. Here you're talking about another central facility, or not central, but one. And how did you determine that 75 is enough? And I would think it would be interesting if you added parking spaces to your comparison on these other 6 towns that you looked at, because, one I'm familiar with, Tewksbury has a very nice senior center. Their population is about 29,000.
Where was that, sorry?
Tewksbury.
Tewksbury.
Their population is 29,000. I looked on Google Earth today, 90 parking spaces, and I've seen it full.
Yeah.
So how did you get to 75 as your number?
So we worked with our project team and taking a look at, the other thing, we toured senior centers and community centers all over the Commonwealth. I think I've been to over 50 now, not only in this state, but other states, on vacation, don't tell my wife. And it was quite frankly, it was a combination of our visits to other senior and community centers to see what they did, as well as looking at our current, not current parking, because clearly it's woefully inadequate, but looking at the current use and what the projected use will be based on what other senior and community centers saw in their uptick after they completed their projects. We did learn very clearly from a lot of those centers, they need more parking. But also, not just they need more parking, one of the big lessons learned for a lot of them was accessible parking spots. The code has a minimum. The minimum is not enough for this demographic. So, but that's where we landed. Certainly a case could be made. The thing about parking, and I'm sure many of you are aware because you're actively involved in the community, is that you can make a case for way more, you can make a case for way less. We felt that was a good kind of middle ground. Each site is going to be independent though. What we said when we established that was that if it's a site that provides lots of adjacent parking, we can reduce that number. If it's a site that has no adjacent parking, we may actually end up having to increase that number. We'll evaluate it as we move forward.
Can you give an example of what you mean by adjacent parking and where you think that is?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you a real world example. Since it was brought up already tonight, Albemarle is a good example. There's a lot of parking along Albemarle. Lots of complementary parking. There are times of the day and year when it is needed. There are other times when it's underutilized. So that could be something that we look at as a way to complement parking. There are adjacent streets to many of our parks, but we need to evaluate each one. It's also, we need to recognize that, and this kind of goes back to not only when we're doing traffic analysis, we're also doing parking analysis, pedestrian analysis, user analysis. What are the times of day that it's high use, low use? Because each site, if we're looking at adjacent parking, we need to also be looking at what is the flow of traffic in and around that. A good example is the Newton Center playground. Obviously, it's a wonderful little large passive park. But during certain times of the day, the adjacent streets can be a zoo because you're right next to Newton Center. So that would be something that we would need to evaluate as we're looking at parking. Yes?
Just a comment that we came when we heard this because our family uses the parks all the time, as many families do, and so it's just wanted to voice a plea to leave the green spaces and playgrounds, knowing that if you take them away, you take them away from families.
Thank you.
I'd like to just reiterate that. My kids are grown now, but we were going to every single one of these parks for sports, for playing, recreation. And if you don't have something to offer young families, you're not going to attract young families to the city.
You never know. We might even end up with an option that nets an increase in open space. So, yes.
Yeah. So I have one more. There's nothing here under for deed restrictions. As I recall, a number of the city parks have deed restrictions. Each one different, sometimes strange deed restrictions. I remember one of the off-leash areas having a restriction about not impeding grazing.
Yep.
Under the very top of the list. Yeah. But I know I see Chris sitting back there, and obviously there's in the middle of it right now, but there's a conservation restriction on the Hampton Park, so obviously that comes into what?
So
there's one at the Avery Estates over at Albemarle.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's the.
And as Alex was saying, it's right here. It's a legal restriction. Again, one of those that doesn't have a weighting factor, because if it has a deed restriction that says thou shalt never build a building there, then it game over.
And I recall that some of the dog areas have deed restrictions. This has been a lot of years, I'm going back here to remember it, but I remember that some of them do have deed restrictions on building. I'll get into my files.
I'm sure you'll find.
Our law department is already going through these sites and looking at deed restrictions as well, but I encourage anybody that's got information, hit us up, let us know. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to speak for the senior citizens who are still mobile. So far today, I lead bird walks for the Newton Conservators and the Brookline Bird Club in Manhattan Park, Cold Spring Park. And you need a big area to still have wood thrushes, scarlet tanagers, rose-breasted grosbeaks. And if you put a 2-acre building in Manhattan or Cold Spring, you're just not gonna have that. It's already very fragile and endangered.
Oh, can I comment, Pete? Jane
Yeah.
Colino.
Hi,
Peter
Jane.
also takes bird walks for the senior center.
I do.
As
I
well.
teach math history there.
Yes, and you teach math history at the senior center as well. So there's a connection to everything everybody's saying. I just wanted to point that out. Seniors are part of families too, so we're not excluding, we're not looking at one or the other. We're all together.
Thank you, Jane.
Yep.
Other questions about siting? Yes, Julie?
No, not about citing.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
Someone mentioned Elliott Street, the public works lot, which is pretty expansive and actually a little bit uncouth, if you remember there. I'm wondering, what happened when you checked that place?
So the DPW yards are something that they're on our big list. How do I put this? The biggest challenge with a site like Elliott Street is that it is a very large lot. It's very inefficiently oriented, meaning that you got buildings kind of scattered all around the site. If you were to do a complete redesign and move everything to one end in a new facility, then you would create the space necessary. You wouldn't even need to move it all to one end. You just need to move some of it to one end. But that kind of gets back to what I said in the beginning. Maybe I didn't say it in the beginning, but one of the principles that we work under whenever we're doing any kind of master planning during the site selection process is we try to solve the problem without creating another one. And that's a big financial component to create those facilities. It doesn't mean that it's off the list, because it is on our list. But that is certainly a factor that we need to look at. The other thing is that it's an open 21E site, meaning that it is on file with the Department of Environmental Protection. It was used as a DPW dump a century ago. So it would require some significant investment on that front as well, based on a change of use for something like this. But again, it's on the list. It's something that we would
With all the factors you're trying to balance.
I hear you. Yeah.
It sounds so bad.
I understand. Yes?
A couple of things, and again, just like you, a disclaimer, I'm not advocating for any of these particular spaces, but did you look at our existing parking lots since we've already built on Austin Street? Again, I'm not in favor of that, I'm just asking, did you all already look at that?
Yep, those are on our list as well. Good example, we looked at the Newton Center Triangle parking lot. We looked at, I'm almost reluctant to say it because I know that that community was just active based on our solar carports, but we looked at the Auburndale Cove parking lot. So there are some large existing hardscape areas that we look at. Some of them are on our middle list, some of them are on the just won't work list. So yes, we're looking at existing.
And again, I'm not advocating for that, I'm just
Yep, no.
look at that. The second thing was, did the council already approve the early childhood program for the existing horse band? Since horse band is moving to car, that is, or was potentially available, but since the Newton Early Childhood Program is being vacated from Aquinas.
They voted last night.
They did.
At public facilities for 558 site plan approval, still needs to go to finance and the full council. 687 Watertown Street is, that site is 60,437 square feet. It is a little small for what we're looking for.
If you're building anyway, you could either, it's a site.
It's a site.
And it's part of it's basically part of Albemarle.
I got you. The other important component is that it's school owned. So the school committee would need to give it up. And they have said they're not going to give it up. So there is that we have to work through. But you're right. It has a lot of things going for it. It's a 60,000 square feet right next to a park. So I get that. I do. But it's on our list, but it's right now, because it is a school-owned parcel, it's on the third tier.
Is Aquinas also school-owned?
Aquinas is a little more gray. For those that, I mean, I'm sure most everybody knows what Aquinas is, but the 150 Jackson Road, that's 6.2 acres. 6.5, who's going? Yes?
What about, it's a little weird, but think a minute. What about next to the parking lot of the library, since we've already uglying it up with all those solar panels? And you have to underground parking. But it's a pretty little site. I don't know if it's big enough.
So the library and city hall are on our list, on the list of 24, but we're going to continue to evaluate all of those. That is, as I was talking about, when we're looking at each individual site, we have to look at what the ripple effect is from a cost perspective and a development perspective. But every site has those costs. I mean, quite frankly, if we end up on a park, and let's say people do support it, there's going to be costs that we have to incur in order to address whatever the impact of our facility is. So we recognize that. I'm not saying that there isn't a cost of doing what we're talking about doing, but it is a balance and something that we compare on each one. Yes, sir.
Question about the current senior center and what their wish list is, and not to get into that today, but what their wish list is for their future home. And our Commissioner of Recreation said he thought that maybe a gymnasium or something is allied to the senior center. That's a lot of ground space that's being taken up, so it seems to be growing in size maybe. But I'm sure you've looked at what their wish list is, but with 75 parking spaces, it's going to be a pretty big parcel of land, I would say.
It is, but what I would say is that the saving grace is that Newton is already operating in a decentralized model. Believe it or not, if it wasn't for the fact that we have facilities around Newton that are already serving senior programming, we'd probably be looking at a facility 3 times this size. So, thank goodness we are in Newton here. It allows us to have a smaller footprint. The gym is a big element, but it's also a very flexible element, and it's also an element, not that we're trying to create a cost center, but it is an element that provides for rentals, which can help sustain this program. So there is, and it's an element, as Bob said, it's in very high demand.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Yes, Jane.
I'd like to answer that question in terms of our wish list. It actually, Jane Colino, Department of Senior Services. Newton is the 5th largest senior population in the city of Newton. In the state of Massachusetts. 5th largest population in the state of Massachusetts. We're approaching 25 to 30% of the population here in Newton. We are in a building that's 8,000 square feet. So at the top of the wish list is more space, and more space that will address the growing demographic. We hear that as you build a building, we will triple the number of people who are participating in a new building. And we want a building that reflects the respect and the inclusion of seniors in the community. And I think that although our building is a beautiful old historic building, it is not reflecting the investment in the senior population that it needs to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a lot of votes.
Yes, ma'am.
Won't this center be serving a great part of the non-senior population also, it sounds like?
Great question. So let me just go back and
What was the question?
Yep, certainly. The question was, won't this center be serving a large portion of the non-senior population as well? So we worked very hard on our mission statement. This is what we are embarking on. So I'm just going to, I don't normally just read slides, but I'm going to read this one. The City of Newton's goal as an age-friendly community is to build a large, well-equipped, comfortable center to meet the unique interests and needs of older adults, both those currently using the senior center and many others who are not. The center will foster a special sense of community and belonging for this growing group. This facility will be designed to optimize the quality of life for Newton's older adults and those who support them through welcoming, respectful, and meaningful opportunities that engage, value, and empower older adults to remain independent and important assets in our community. To your point, when spaces within this facility are not programmed for older adults, the goal is to offer a well-managed, quality, and enriching community and multi-generational experiences for all residents of Newton. So, yeah, so what's that mean? It means that this facility is being designed, programmed, and operated primarily for seniors, and when it's not being used by seniors, it's going to be used and enjoyed by the entire community. So, yes, it's a long way of saying yes. Yes, ma'am.
When you reference the size of the site in the chart, does that take into account wetlands on that site?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The question was, when we look at a site, do we include wetlands? So, wetlands or wetlands, because that's an important distinction. We've done both. We don't build on wetlands, but there's wetlands and then there's the buffer zone. Zerva School was a prime example. A good chunk of that site was within the buffer, and there's a small portion that's actually in the wetlands. So when we talk about buildable area, we certainly don't include wetlands, and we kind of have a fuzzy, rangy kind of thing we do when we're talking about the buffer area, because there are certain things that you can do in a buffer area. There's others that really not so much. So I would say that for the most part, we're talking about buildable area. Just to be clear, I didn't go through, and I probably should have, but I didn't go through the entire Cold Springs overlays to look at how much of it is wetlands, because if you look, and I'm sure this is where you're coming at this from, if you look at our sheet and the amount of acreage, it's a little misleading, because there's a ton of acreage in the Cold Springs Park, but the reality is that 80% or probably better is untouchable because it's wetlands. Or, well, I should say, very close to untouchable. I know I don't want to.
And also, didn't that used to be a landfill too?
Oh, yeah, there's that.
Toxicity issues?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How is this going to be paid for? Are our taxes going up?
Your taxes are always going up. Proposition 2.5. So the administration the mayor herself.
What was the question?
Sorry, the question was, are our taxes going up because of this project? The mayor has said this at a couple meetings. I will reiterate here. We are not pursuing an override for this project. This is being paid for out of the existing budget. So your taxes are not going up for this, but as I said, welcome to Massachusetts. Your taxes are going up. Yes, sir.
Just a question about the size of the project.
Yep.
I think it's better to bring everything together in one space than decentralize it. It creates a spirit, a community. You can have different resources that you couldn't have if it was spread out all over. I think as people get older and want to stay in the city, they want to feel connected. And if you have a common area where you're likely to meet your friends or acquaintances, it's better to have them in one area than spread all over. So to that end, how did you determine that 38,000 square feet is enough? Maybe it needs to be bigger and we'll close some of the other sites.
So reverse engineering, that's how we did it. We took the existing user group. In visiting all of those different senior and community centers, we looked at what increases they saw after they opened, and we did an estimated growth curve based on that, and we backed into that number ultimately. 38,000 square feet is our current number. Could it expand a little? Yes, very possible. I don't see it expanding a great deal. And the other thing is that as much as I am a firm believer in the centralized model, I do like some decentralization. I like some programming out in the village centers for a couple of very important reasons. One, there are some people that no matter what we offer, it's going to be very difficult for them to get from point A to point B. So that's an important factor. And the other is marketing. People go and maybe they don't want to go to the senior center or to the Newton Center for Active Living because they don't feel that they're ready or at a point in their life that they want to do that, but they're willing to go to the local village, I don't know, call it the Nuneaton Branch Library, I'm just making it up, or the Hyde Center, a great example. They go to the Hyde Center and they do Zumba. Wow, this is fun. I like it. It's very active. I don't feel like a senior citizen here. you know what, maybe I will give this facility a chance, and it brings people in. So I think those are the two major factors.
The other thing, Josh, that you've said is that we're open from 8:30 to 4 Monday through Friday right now, which is very limited.
Yep.
And as we're looking at a new facility, we're looking at expanding hours. So you can expand space, or you can expand hours, or you can do both. And we're looking at a 7-day-a-week program right now. So that definitely increases the opportunity for the numbers of programs that are happening.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And to put that in perspective, the increase in hours that we're talking about, coupled with the 38,000 square foot building, is the equivalent of keeping our hours the same and building almost 100,000 square foot building. So time is a major element here. And part of that gets back to why we think that the gym and some of these more active elements that are within the facility is going to be important, because it will help keep the lights on, quite frankly, and allow us to financially sustain ourselves and open this facility up for everybody to enjoy. Yes.
Quick question, what is the target construction date? Well, that's the thing, like, this could take forever, or it could take nothing.
So,
like, what are you really thinking?
Well, I'm going to go on a very short journey here with you. One of the places that I visited was Salem. Salem actually went through 3 mayors. One of them passed away, the one that started it. It took decades to get their facility built. We don't want this to take decades. We don't want it to take a decade. Typically, projects like this take 5 or 6 years from start to finish. We're 1 year in. So, and that is not, it doesn't take 5 or 6 years to build a building. If everybody said right now, hey, go put it on Cold Springs Park, just kidding. And you just cut us loose, we'd be done in 12 to 18 months. We would build it, we'd open the doors. But there's a lengthy public process, and that's important. It's very, very important.
Marlboro took 18 months, but I think it had a lot to do with consensus in the community on the site.
Yep.
So, I mean, given that factor, you might, again, what Amy said, look at some of the hardscaped places, because the community, once you start touching parks, that's when people start getting activated and upset and prolonging the process. Whereas, if you have a building that's already there and is in disrepair, to fix it up, it might make the process go much quicker.
Kind of funny, because the example that Jane just mentioned, they put the Marlboro Senior Center, they put it right on a park, on open space. I'm not suggesting that that is what we're doing here, and the other thing that I would say is that there are parks that have existing hardscape on them already. So there might be opportunities to repurpose hardscape that is already on a park that then serves all of our needs without touching open space. Still important. It's not that simple, but just a possibility. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, have you ever considered adding elder housing to this center? Because to put more.
So it has been brought up. It was brought up very early on. Jane, I want to give credit where credit's due.
Salem.
Picard?
Joyce
Picard.
Picard.
I
Joyce
always
Picard,
like to give
yeah.
credit wherever I can. Joyce Picard brought this up.
She's a member of the Council on Aging.
Thank you. Almost a year ago. She had asked if we could keep an open mind to the possibility of senior housing as part of this facility. Salem did do a senior housing project, but it's a little, if you look into the details, it's a little different. They took a very large city-owned parcel and they sold off a portion of it to a developer who created a senior facility, residential facility, and then with the remainder of the site, they built their senior center. So, yes, it is something that we're considering. Each site is going to be independently evaluated. Some may afford that, some may not, but it is something that's on the table as well. Yes, Julie.
This might be just me, but is your, I call it the semi-acronym, is that going to be the final name? Because frankly, thank you, oh God, because it makes me gag. It just seems sort of patronizing, both patronizing to people who are active and kind of dismissive of people who aren't active. And just too cutesy, so.
We thought about just calling it the project, but there's so many going on in Newton right now. No, we actually did spend a good amount of time thinking about what we would call the project, mainly because we need to call it something. We got to put out flyers and get people
Okay.
there. I'm not going to get involved in naming,
Mhm.
that's one thing I've learned over the years. I don't touch. So, but I'm sure there's going to be a very robust conversation about the naming of this facility.
Okay, I will feel better about saying the word now. Thank you. It might go back, once it's the senior center, it might become the senior center again, once you don't have the old senior center.
Well, so I.
The senior center? You use the senior center.
Julia, he's asking you a question.
Well, actually, I'm 64, so I'm almost like old enough to really feel like I'm entitled to, but because I'm still working and I don't have time, I've used it mainly for things like we've had Newton Tree Conservancy programs there, so we've rented the space and it's a great space. I've been to political events. Yeah, exactly.
I'm 62 and I use it.
Yeah, we don't have to be told we don't have to be told we're active or, yeah.
So I appreciate that. We are going to be very sensitive to the naming of the facility. The one thing I would say is that I believe that we are going to try to get away from the senior center. And if you don't take my word for it, take a look out in the country. There is a movement, and it's been going on for a while, to get away from that. It is. There are a couple different reasons. One, we did a ton of meetings all over the city of Newton. We met with a lot of seniors at a lot of different villages for quite a while. And we heard from a lot of people who said, I'm not going to a senior center, I'm not old. I had a 93-year-old man tell me, I'm not going to a senior center, I'm not old. There are people that just the name alone will keep them from going through the doors. And quite frankly, if it means that we have to come up with a different name to get people to come in the doors and enjoy the wonderful programs and services, then that's what we'll do. Yes, sir.
Josh, I'd just like to add on that comment. There are a lot of people that don't go to our library, all right? But that doesn't mean we're not going to build a beautiful library like we have.
Yep.
All right. It's an important part of the community.
Yes, sir.
Could you clarify something for me on, so you said you consider traffic patterns important?
Sorry, they're still chatting. Go for it.
You consider traffic patterns important, but then you seem to say you're really gonna take it into account when you get down to your final three choices. Let me explain.
Certainly.
We have a terrible traffic pattern right now in Auburndale on Commonwealth Avenue. We have traffic coming in the evening from 95, going down to Lexington Street and making a left, and similarly going out in the morning. And each one lasts 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
Coming out of Waltham on Lexington, making a right on Commonwealth, and again, going out to 95. Why would you not consider that important enough to take into consideration now when you're deciding which are important and which aren't?
Yep. So we do take that into consideration. What I was speaking of is that the actual traffic analysis, where we actually have the consultant come in and go do the field work, that is something that we wouldn't pay for 24 times over. We know, sometimes anecdotally, sometimes based on previous traffic studies that have been done, like Auburndale is a great example. We have traffic analysis from the Auburndale Square project. I've driven it for 13 years. I drive through there every morning, so I know it well as well. I lived that pain. So we will certainly consider that. That is part of our access to the site. Again, you can't get from point A to point B. And that's not just, can you physically get there, can you drive there? We heard from people who said there are certain parts of the city where I just don't go there, it's just not worth it, the traffic's too bad. We recognize that. I've worked for the city for 13-ish years now. Bob's been here for, I don't know, 75, 80 years. He's been here a very long time as well. We know the areas that are challenging, I guess is the best way to put it. So we will consider that. Yes, ma'am.
I live in Auburndale, and I live on Ann Street in Auburndale, so it's right down the street from Lions Park Playground. Right next door to me is condos being built, 16 condo units, underground parking, multifunctional hall, and above that office space. So we're going to get inundated with traffic there. There's going to be something going on Grove Street that's gonna bring even more traffic to the area.
Yep.
So I hope and pray that Lions is gonna be off the table. My children, my boys and my daughter played baseball, children still do. They play Frisbee there. It's a wonderful walking area for dogs and for people. So it's a beautiful place, and it's green space. I don't wanna see any of the parks go. I totally agree with whoever was saying use the existing buildings, whatever you can find, an existing building, and build there, rather than take away our green space, which is getting fewer and fewer in Newton now. And once the green space is gone, it's gone.
Yep.
We can't get it back.
I understand.
Josh, I have a message here. Hi, Josh, watching from Nicaragua.
Oh, awesome. Well, hello, Nicaragua. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just concerned about the naming. I think of the senior center as for seniors. When I go over there, it's not seniors in it. It doesn't seem like there's young people there. And you're saying you want to change the new center and change the name maybe to like community center. If it's the Newton Community Center, then that means it's open to everybody in the community, and it's not just a senior center. So is the center we're in now really a community center, or is it a senior center? And are we really building in the future another senior center, which we're going to call something else, and it's really a community center because it's really for all the citizens? And if it's for all the citizens, the senior center has seniors. If you make it a community center, then I think everybody, like my daughter, who's 25, 35, will say, oh man, this is great. They're all really going to use it. So you'll need like 10 times the size of this space. So again, I'm not sure what you're really building, if you're building a new senior center or you're building a community center.
So we are building a facility that is designed and will be operated for seniors. And when it's not being used by seniors, we will open it up to other groups. Meaning that I know, because I have a lot of buildings under my purview, there is a massive demand for basketball games at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. It's not to say that seniors don't want to use their facility at 10 or 11 at night, but it could be senior basketball.
The MIT library.
There are opportunities on the weekends. There's continuing education. We're talking about educational components. We're talking about expansion of services. We're talking about expansion of yoga, Pilates, active uses. We're talking about expansion of services, which may or may not be attractive to the senior population. Really, the demographic, the target demographic that we're looking at when it comes to the naming is we're trying to bring in the people that are over 55, over 65 in the kind of the earlier generations of the senior populations. We're trying to bring them in earlier on. And what we're seeing both in Newton as well as in the country is that there tends to be a reluctance to go to the senior center for that age group. So as Jane has said eloquently many times, it's worth it in her mind and in my mind to consider a name other than the senior center if it's enough to get people over the hump and to come on in. Yes, ma'am.
So the big thorny question, are you planning to have any dedicated senior space in this design?
So, the question was, are we planning to have any dedicated senior space? So, what we're trying to do is we are creating spaces that are going to be designed specifically and operated specifically for seniors throughout the day. A good example of this is we've been working with the current senior center users on a lounge kind of area that establishes that sense of community. At the same time, what we're trying not to do is send a message to the broader community, including the senior community, the other seniors that aren't using it, that there's a place that you're not allowed to go into. So it's a delicate balance. We are committed to making sure that we provide a space that provides a sense of community that is tailored specifically and programmed specifically for seniors in Newton. But we're trying to avoid the connotation of a place that's exclusive and nobody else is allowed. It's the best way I can answer.
So you're trying to avoid what happened in the library, where you have the teen room that other people aren't allowed into?
So the library, for folks, just to repeat the question, we're trying to avoid the situation that happened at the library where they created a teen room and nobody else is allowed. I'm a few years past being a teenager. I know I'm young, but I'm not that young. I am allowed. Others are allowed in there. It is programmed for teens, but it is allowed other people.
You're not allowed to use the chairs.
They didn't kick me out. Maybe they think
There's a
I'm young.
sign there that you could pass through, you could take a book or something, but you're not supposed to sit in there and congregate.
So I talked to Phil McNulty and I talked to the trustees about that because that issue did come up, I'm going to say 3-4 months ago, maybe a little longer as we had these meetings. And they said, very similarly, they're trying to create the same thing that I just described, where it's a place that is designed and programmed for teens, but they're not trying to make it completely exclusive. So it's something that they're going to continue to work on. Signage may be a major component of that. So we're all feeling our way through this. They are as well. So, yes, sir.
On the term senior, I mean, you know, they came up with the term senior because the term elderly wasn't good. And I have no problem with senior, and I don't know whether it's like an anecdotal thing, but I'm just curious, since there's a lot of seniors here, how many would be in favor of calling it the senior center?
Amen. Fine.
Yeah, I think call it the senior center. Because, you know, when I've been talking about it the last few days, I say, well, it's a senior center. When people, that's what they use. This other crazy names are like, sounds like, just call it a senior center. I think that the people here think that's it.
I think he's right about that, because people who are over whatever age you consider senior, 50, please start sending us stuff.
Yeah.
Or maybe before. If you don't have some connotation about it being a senior center, people that are actually in the demographic aren't going to go there.
Yeah.
I think you'll lose people,
That's
not gain
absolutely right.
people.
But you're losing people now who won't go to senior center.
Well, you're gonna have it both ways.
Hundreds, thousands.
Can I ask a question? Of those people who want it called senior center, who are older adults, how many of you come to the senior center? Far fewer.
Wait a second.
Yeah, but
Far
not
fewer.
because of
I go.
No, I understand, but
Hold
is a
on.
piece of that is because it's a senior center?
Not at all. Not
Okay.
at all.
Well, that's a
I will
follow-up
almost be more
question.
than likely go.
A follow-up comment. I'm a very active 65-year-old.
Yep.
I go to programs that the Bedford COA, which is what they call themselves, we have a biking group that had a maximum number that we've ever had of 33 on Monday. We have a hiking group that goes all under the auspices of the Bedford COA, and we have mailings, emails that go out to hundreds of people that participate. So I'm active in other communities because they offer activities that Newton doesn't offer, which is another issue. I tried to find out about walking and biking here, but they're all way below what I do in terms of mileage and activity. They said, well, you can lead it, and I'm not interested in starting it. I just want to participate. So.
Yes, sir.
I've always wondered about the senior term. I don't mind being kind of like the stage. But there's a big difference in seniors. It's like it could encompass a 30-year period.
60.
60,
broader
yeah.
than any other demographic. And there's a big
110.
difference, I think, from 60 to 80 and 80 to 100. I think those people, those groups need different things. And when I've gone to the senior center, correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't been there that much, but it seems like it's mainly for 80 and over.
I think on that move, we should quit.
Next question.
I just like you live there and get oxygen
Is there a budget?
Yes, there is a budget. It's posted online, 16.45 million.
16?
16.45 million.
That's for the construction.
That's total project budget. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to make a suggestion. I got excited about this whole thing happening for Needham when I went to the Needham one. How many people have been to the new Needham? And I hear the Wellesley's gorgeous too. All you have to do is go there and you get excited. You want to go there. I mean, I think the Newton one is just ugly and old and depressing, and you know, no matter who's in there, you know. So So I think if you build a great building, and of course with I love what she said about different kinds of programming, like that kind that we don't have, and also a beautiful building that feels wonderful, and that anybody can, like I can see seniors, also might want to bring their grandchildren in and have a little lunch there, and that could be wonderful to give a sense of community. So I think if it's a beautiful place, people will go.
I mean, I'll second that. The Needham one's fabulous, but the Wellesley one is already too small.
It's
already too
Oh,
small.
really?
Yeah.
It's fabulous, but it's already too small.
Does that mean because people are going?
Yes.
How big is that one?
Well,
We
I think it's
have, I'm
15,000.
gonna, 15?
I think it's about 15,000 square feet.
It's a much smaller town.
Yes, Wally. Oh, I'm sorry.
Wally's my neighbor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
13,000 square feet, Wellesley.
The Needham one is really big.
Wellesley, 13,000.
We preserve.
Yeah, it's been a few years. I thought I'd get you your name.
I apologize really. I just found out about this meeting last night, and I looked at the list of the top 24, and I said, I have to come tonight. And I'm in favor of the new senior center. It's something that represents Newton. I think that's all great. The statistics that were spread out, all that's great. My concern, I find the fact that we're meeting in this building very ironic. We're in the school committee's main building. A generation ago, the leaders of this city made some very serious bad mistakes by selling off school buildings that we still live with. And I looked at the list of 24, and I didn't understand priority, so I'm still open to understanding priority. So the list is full of green space. So the current leaders of Newton are currently destructing our villages and turning them into micro-urban centers. Now I see this is a threat going against our green space. The two descriptions of Newton are we're a city of 13 villages, that's in danger, and we're the garden city. And this is just one project, so just one green space might be taken. But that can be the nose in the tent. I'm very concerned at all of the green space that is top priority for this project. There has to be a better solution. Green space, we don't sacrifice that because we don't get it back. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Karen Osborne. I'm from the Upper Falls, born and raised. And I am getting AARP cards, so but I'm not quite ready to need the services that are very important from a senior center. I actually have a business, which I have two comments I want to make. And I have a business which we curate and we create products and things that help people stay in home while they're aging in place. So just put that aside. My comment about that is because I find it interesting I walked in, because I'm really here for the same reason we're here. And I find it interesting I came in, I'm hearing talk about a name. And I just want to add to that point that for when I'm doing my business and everybody wants to stay younger, longer, and live more active lives, oh, that's great. I applaud when you were talking with the woman over there about the activities that you provide, not really the name. I mean, I'm looking forward to getting older and wiser, and I'm proud of my grades. But I'm actually here with the green space too. Yeah. My house is exactly right across from Echo Bridge, and the thought of anything being built on, I don't know how many people are here for that part of this. How many people are here for the green space part? Okay, there probably need to be more of us. That's a good number. Have we taken account on that? Who's opposing to?
Yeah, we spent like the first
Okay,
hour
so I
and a half
apologize,
talking
because I was
about
late too, actually. So.
No worries. By all means, I'm happy. I will repeat myself as many times as whatever folks want.
But I didn't know about this meeting myself till last night, and I've been involved with the Friends of Hemlock Gorge. Yeah. Brian Yates, many people will know, a wonderful man I've lived with my whole, grew up with. Yeah. He actually named me the Empress of Hemlock Gorge. And if we have a great picnic on the first Tuesday of August with the band, so we're actually going to be doing memorials for him. So come on down. But you said it perfectly. This is a grave. I just don't understand how we can be even having this consideration. And I think that there's going to have to be a lot of active participation to stop it, because there are so many.
I want to stop the.
Oh, God, no.
I just want
I'm
to
all
protect
for the
the
building.
green.
I don't care.
I think you do a great job at the senior center.
Thank you. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for. I don't care if you spend $20 million. You should probably spend $30 million on seniors' needs, seriously. I'm talking about the green space, I don't know if we spend 50 million. We don't spend enough money on this issue. The population's needs are changing drastically, and municipalities and politicians are not keeping up with that. So these are long conversations, but I unfortunately didn't know till last night. I'm dressed because I'm actually working in my warehouse tonight. So I just look forward to more debate on this issue, and I think we need to get serious about driving up more support to not build it in a green space. Build it. And again, I went to Emerson, and they sold it as condos. Find one of those buildings that exists, that is not being used properly, you can make it work. We need to renovate and not build it in this space.
Any other questions on site selection process? All right. We still have a whole night ahead of us of other topics. Folks are more than welcome to stay. What I would propose is just for both of you where you came in, if you'd like, what I'm suggesting is I turn it over to our architect to introduce themselves and go through the presentation. You two, if you want to stay and listen to that, you're more than welcome. If you want, we can step out and I can fill you in on what we talked about the first part of the meeting. It's completely up to you.
Oh, it's on the city website. It's, this is the, it was part of the May 29 Finance Committee agenda. It's in there. For some reason, it's not on the actual page on the city website for NewCAL. They don't seem to have updated the page very much with all this new information. Finance Committee, if you go to City Council, Standing Committees, Finance, 2019 meetings, and they have agendas and reports, and the agendas and reports for the last meeting in May it was. I'm going to start a new recording here. Starting a new recording.